To the world, Susan Hayward looked like pure Hollywood strength, bold roles, fierce eyes, an Oscar-winning performance, and the image of a woman who could survive anything. But behind the spotlight, her real life was far more complicated, painful, and quietly tragic. Fame brought her success, but it also came with lonely battles, broken relationships, and struggles she rarely spoke about in public. The woman audiences saw on screen was not the same woman who went home at night. So what really happened to Susan Hayward? How did one of Hollywood's toughest leading ladies slowly fade from the spotlight, and what did it cost her to carry that strong image for so long? Susan Hayward's story begins in uncertainty, even down to the year of her birth. Some newspapers claimed she arrived on June 30th, 1919, while others insisted it was 1917. What is certain is the place: Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York, a neighborhood that shaped her toughness long before Hollywood ever noticed her. She was born to Edith Mariner, with a father named Walter and a mother, Ellen Pearson Mariner. Susan grew up with two older siblings, a sister named Florence and a brother, Walter Jr., known to everyone as Wally. Money was always scarce. Susan later recalled just how poor the family was, remembering days when she and Wally gathered discarded newspapers and empty bottles, selling them for a few extra coins to help keep the household afloat. Childhood wasn't kind to her. Other kids teased her for wearing the same clothes again and again, and she carried a limp after being struck by a car at just 7 years old. Yet even then, she was stubbornly independent. She proudly said she was the first girl in her neighborhood to deliver newspapers, an early sign of the grit that would define her life. At 12, everything shifted. She was cast in a school play, and for the first time, she felt seen. Her classmates noticed her, and so did her mother. Susan became convinced that performing wasn't just a hobby. It was her way in, her escape, her chance to belong. In 1935, she graduated from commercial high school at 18. By then, her limp had nearly vanished, and her striking red hair suddenly mattered. Color photography was becoming fashionable, and talent and modeling agencies were searching for faces that stood out. In 1937, the Thornton Modeling Agency landed her a spot in the Saturday Evening Post. That single image changed everything. The photograph caught the attention of representatives for producer David O. Selznick, who was searching for actresses to audition for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Selznick invited Susan to Hollywood, even sending train tickets for her in Florence. The role, of course, went to Vivien Leigh, but the door to Hollywood had been cracked open. Florence returned home, but Susan stayed. She found a manager, signed a short-term contract, and adopted a new name, Susan Hayward. The early years were rough, small roles, studio rejections, and setbacks, but she refused to leave. In 1944, she married actor Jess Barker, against her mother's wishes and nearly everyone else's advice. A year later, twins Timothy and Gregory were born. As Susan's career began to rise, Jess's slowly faded. The imbalance strained everything. What followed were years of conflict, heartbreak, and bitter custody battles. It was a painful beginning to fame, one shaped by poverty, persistence, and personal sacrifice. And it left marks on Susan Hayward that never truly faded. By the late 1940s, Susan Hayward's hard-fought persistence was finally paying off. In 1947, she earned her first Academy Award nomination for Smash Up, the story of a woman starring opposite Eddie Albert. It was more than a career milestone, it was validation. 2 years later, she was nominated again for My Foolish Heart with Dana Andrews, and then once more in 1952 for With a Song in My Heart, alongside Roy Acuff. Each nomination felt like another step away from her difficult beginnings, proof that she was no longer merely surviving Hollywood, but conquering it. Then came 1954, a year that reshaped her life in deeply personal ways. After years of bitter conflict, Susan finally divorced Jess Barker and won full custody of her twin sons. The legal battles and emotional scars remained, but for the first time, she had control over her own future and her children's. That same year, she accepted a role that would later haunt Hollywood history. Susan co-starred with John Wayne in The Conqueror, an ambitious epic that would become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Producer Dick Powell selected Snow Canyon, Utah, near St. George, as the primary filming location. From June through August of 1954, cast and crew worked beneath the desert sun, unaware, or perhaps choosing not to be fully aware, that the site lay just 137 miles downwind from the Yucca Flats nuclear testing grounds in Nevada. Though concerns were raised about radioactive fallout, the government assured everyone that the area was safe. Even more alarmingly, nearly 60 tons of the same red desert sand were shipped back to California for studio reshoots, unknowingly carrying contamination with it. When The Conqueror was finally released in 1956, it failed creatively and was soon forgotten by audiences and by most of the people who made it. But time revealed a chilling legacy. Years later, it emerged that 91 of the 220 cast and crew members had developed cancer. Among them were some of Hollywood's biggest names. John Wayne suffered from lung, stomach, and throat cancer, fighting for years before passing away in June 1979. His son later recalled that Wayne remained characteristically upbeat, even near the end. Dick Powell, the man who had chosen the Utah location for its visual resemblance to the Mongolian terrain of Genghis Khan, died of lung cancer in January 1963. He was just 58. Actress Agnes Moorehead succumbed to uterine cancer in 1974. She reportedly once said that nearly everyone involved with the film had died of cancer, and on her deathbed, she confided to her close friend Debbie Reynolds that she regretted ever taking the role. Actor Pedro Armendariz was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer only 4 years after filming The Conqueror. While working on From Russia with Love in 1963, he was informed that he had only weeks or months to live. In quiet agony, he forced himself through his remaining scenes so his family could receive his final paycheck. What had once seemed like just another forgotten Hollywood failure became something far darker, a tragic reminder of ambition, misplaced trust, and the unseen cost paid by those who stood too close to danger, believing they were safe. Pedro Armendariz's story ended in devastating silence. On June 18, 1963, he was alone in a hotel room with his wife of many years, Carmen. Weak, in pain, and facing a terminal diagnosis, Pedro asked her to step out and bring him a hamburger. While she was gone, he took his own life. He was only 51. It was a final act born not of drama, but of despair, an ending as painful as it was abrupt. He was not the only shadow left behind by The Conqueror. Character actor John Hoyt later died of lung cancer in 1991. Actress Jean Tierney, another victim linked to the film's toxic legacy, passed away from breast cancer in February 1992. One by one, familiar names faded, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and quiet regret. If you travel east along Interstate 20 from Atlanta today, exit at number 19, follow Highway 113 south for a few miles, and look for Center Point Road near the sign for Our Lady of Perpetual Help, you'll find a place tied to another painful chapter, this time in Susan Hayward's life. In 1955, Susan earned yet another Academy Award nomination, this time for I'll Cry Tomorrow, once again sharing the screen with Eddie Albert. But behind the accolades, she was unraveling. That same year, her mother, Ellen, received a chilling phone call. Susan's voice was exhausted and broken. She told her mother she could no longer go on, but urged her not to worry. She would be well taken care of. Terrified, Ellen contacted the police. Officers forced their way into Susan Sherman Oak's home, breaking through the patio doors. Inside, they found her unconscious on the floor, surrounded by empty bottles of sleeping pills. Without waiting for an ambulance, they rushed her to the hospital, saving her life just in time. Later, Jess Barker admitted that the incident followed a vicious argument. He confessed that in anger, he had said cruel and damaging things to her. Fame had given Susan Hayward everything she once dreamed of, but in moments like these, it also revealed just how high the cost could be. When Susan Hayward was finally released from the hospital, reporters crowded around her, eager for a dramatic confession. Someone asked if she was at last finished with Jess Barker. Susan, still fragile but sharp as ever, offered only a dry, almost playful reply. That's what the lady said. It was a deflection, but also a quiet closing of a painful chapter. 2 years later, in 1957, Susan disappeared from the headlines and quietly remarried in Phoenix, Arizona. This time, there were no flashbulbs or studio fanfare. She wed Floyd Eaton Chalkley, a man far removed from Hollywood's glare. The two had met at a Christmas party and quickly became inseparable. Chalkley was many things: a former federal agent, an attorney, a successful businessman, and the owner of a Cadillac dealership in Carrollton. He also owned a farm and cattle range, a world Susan found unexpectedly comforting. Floyd had been married once before and had 2 daughters from that union. By the time he and Susan settled in Carrollton, they built a life that felt steady and real. For nearly 9 years, the town became their refuge. There, Susan wasn't treated as a movie star at all. She was simply Mrs. Chalkley. Locals often saw her driving a pickup truck into town, gathering supplies for the farm they named Chalkmar, a blend of Chalkley and Mariner, a quiet nod to her roots. Together, the Chalkleys donated 13 acres of their land for the construction of a Catholic church, Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Their home sat just across the road, close enough to watch the church rise from the soil they once worked. Susan worked less during these years, but when she returned to the screen, she did so with force. In 1958, just 1 year after her marriage, she finally claimed the Academy Award that had eluded her for so long, winning for I Want to Live. Life in Carrollton, paired with constant travel for film work, became their new normal, a balance of fame and farmland. But peace never lasts forever. By 1966, Floyd's health began to fail. He had long suffered from hepatitis contracted during the war, and Susan had cared for him through years of quiet decline. While she was filming in Italy, his condition worsened. Production halted as she rushed back. He spent weeks at Holy Cross Hospital before returning home to Carrollton, where he died shortly after. Floyd Eaton Chalkley was 56 years old, and once again, Susan Hayward found herself facing loss, alone, but forever changed by the love she had finally found. After Floyd Eaton Chalkley's death, Susan Hayward retreated into a grief that seemed to swallow her whole. She dressed almost exclusively in black, and one of her sons later said it felt as though she was living more with the memory of her husband than in the present. Unable to endure life in the home they had shared, she sold the farm, admitting that every room reminded her of what she had lost. She drifted for a time, spending months in Florida, before eventually returning to California, carrying her sorrow with her. In 1967, Susan reappeared briefly on screen with a small role in Valley of the Dolls, alongside Barbara Parkins, Patty Duke, and Sharon Tate. It was a fleeting return, followed by her final film in 1972, The Revengers, co-starring William Holden. Behind the scenes, however, her health was quietly unraveling. Persistent headaches sent her to the hospital for tests, where she checked in under the name Margaret Redding, hoping for privacy. The diagnosis was devastating: brain cancer, with doctors giving her only months to live. Yet Susan, as always, refused to disappear quietly. In 1973, against medical advice and physical reality, she resolved to present the Academy Award for Best Actress. Standing beside co-host Charlton Heston, she appeared before the world once more. Chemotherapy had taken her famous red hair, forcing her to wear a wig, and paralysis had weakened much of her right side. Heston gently guided her on and off the stage. To endure the night, she relied on heavy medication, fighting seizures and exhaustion. As soon as she reached her car afterward, her strength gave way, and she suffered another seizure. In 1974, Susan publicly acknowledged her illness. Her son, Tim Barker, later described the heartbreaking decline that followed. She lost weight, struggled to swallow, and her body weakened to the point where she often lay curled in pain. The cancer spread relentlessly, leaving little dignity behind. Tim became convinced, along with the children of John Wayne and Dick Powell, that her illness was connected to radiation exposure from the government's nuclear testing near the location of the Conqueror. He questioned why no warning had ever been given, believing it might have spared many families immeasurable suffering. On March 14, 1975, Susan Hayward suffered a massive seizure at her home in California. Even in death, uncertainty followed her. Newspapers reported her age as either 55 or 57, reflecting the long-standing confusion surrounding her birth year. Her grave bears no date to settle the question. In the end, Susan was returned to Carrollton, the place where she had once found peace, and laid to rest beside Eaton Chalkley, the man who had given her a life far from Hollywood's glare and a love she never truly stopped mourning.